Welcome to the module, Science of Reading in the High School Classroom, Part 3, Focus on Reading Comprehension. We value your time and appreciate your active participation during this module. Here are a few suggested learning norms to make the most of your time. If possible, work in an environment with as few distractions so you can engage and reflect. Take notes and jot down ideas and questions as needed. Lastly, use this time wisely to ensure your professional learning with university instructors is productive. Here is the agenda for today's module: learning objectives, science of reading and comprehension, instructional practices, modeling and scaffolding, applying to high school text, and summary of learning. Here are today's learning objectives. By the end of this module, participants will be able to understand the science of reading and its application to comprehension, identify and implement instructional practices for literary and informational texts, model and scaffold comprehension strategies to support student learning across content areas, and apply strategies to high school text and reflect on integrating them into classroom instruction. Let's begin with a quick review of the foundations of reading comprehension. Comprehension goes beyond simply decoding words. It's about making meaning from the text. This process is influenced by several factors, including vocabulary knowledge, understanding syntax, background knowledge, the ability to make inferences, and awareness of text structure. Importantly, comprehension is an active process. Students must connect what they are reading to what they already know, ask questions as they go, and summarize or paraphrase to check their understanding. Teaching these skills explicitly helps students move from just reading words to truly understanding and interacting with text. Scarborough's reading rope is a helpful way to visualize how skilled reading develops. It shows that comprehension depends on the integration of two main strands. The first strand is decoding, which includes word recognition skills such as phonemic awareness, phonics, and sight word knowledge. The second strand is language comprehension. It involves vocabulary, background knowledge, verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge. Strong comprehension occurs when these strands are woven together. Students must both decode words accurately and understand the meaning behind them to become proficient readers. This model reminds us that teaching reading isn't just about decoding or vocabulary alone, but how these skills work together. Now, let's look at instructional practices that build comprehension. Here are 3 instructional practices we will look at more closely within this section. Vocabulary instruction and prior knowledge. This ties directly to the vocabulary and background knowledge strands of the reading rope. These strands support language comprehension, which is essential for fluent and meaningful reading. Teaching text structures. This practice supports the language structures and literacy knowledge strands. These strands are critical for building deeper language comprehension, as they help students process and organize what they're reading. And questioning strategies. This aligns with the verbal reasoning strand. Verbal reasoning enhances students' ability to infer, interpret, and analyze, which are core components of proficient comprehension. When teaching vocabulary, it's important to focus on both Tier 2 and Tier 3 words. Tier 2 words are academic and cross-disciplinary, meaning they appear across multiple subjects. Examples include words like analyze, determine, and justify. Teaching these words helps students access complex text in any content area. Tier 3 words are discipline-specific, tied to a particular subject. For instance, photosynthesis in science, alliteration in English language arts, or legislation in social studies. Students need these words to understand content deeply. We also want to teach morphology, breaking words into roots, prefixes, and suffixes. This builds transferable knowledge. For example, the word predict can be broken down. Pre means before, and dict means say. So the word literally means to say before. Understanding word parts helps students decode and comprehend unfamiliar words across all subjects. Helping students connect new vocabulary to what they already know makes learning more meaningful and memorable. One effective strategy is to use analogies, showing how a new word is similar to a familiar concept. Visuals can also support understanding. Diagrams, pictures, or graphic organizers help students form mental connections. Additionally, providing concrete examples in context allows students to see how the word is used in real situations. For example, if teaching the word photosynthesis, you might relate it to the idea of a recipe for plants. Just like people need ingredients to make a meal, plants need sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide to make energy. Connecting new words to prior knowledge builds stronger comprehension and retention. When teaching literary analysis, focus on Tier 2 academic vocabulary that students will encounter across texts, such as symbolism, irony, foreshadowing, and theme. Use morphology to deepen understanding. For example, foreshadow can be broken down into fore, meaning before, and shadow, meaning hint. So the word literally means a hint of what comes before. It's also important to connect vocabulary to the text students are reading. Before reading Romeo and Juliet, for example, introduce words like star-crossed, feud, and fate, and help students relate them to modern equivalents, such as family rivalries in movies or TV shows. By linking vocabulary instruction to text and context, students are better prepared to engage with complex literature and make meaningful connections. A second practice for reinforcing reading comprehension is teaching text structures. Text structures refer to how information is organized in a text, and understanding it helps students comprehend and remember what they read. Common types include narrative, which presents events in a story sequence, cause and effect, where one event leads to another, problem and solution, which introduces an issue and its resolution, compare contrast, highlighting similarities and differences, and chronological or sequence, which presents information step by step. Teach students to identify signal words, which often include clues about the structure. For example, cause and effect text may include words like because, as a result, or therefore, while compare and contrast text often use words like similarly, however, or unlike. Teaching students to recognize both the structure and these signal words supports stronger comprehension across all types of text. To help students understand text and language structures, provide practical tools that make organization visible. Graphic organizers are effective for each type of structure. For example, cause and effect charts, problem and solution diagrams, compare and contrast Venn diagrams, and sequence or timeline charts. Encourage students to also highlight or annotate signal words in passages, such as because or therefore for cause and effect, and similarly or however for compare and contrast. Using these tools helps students actively engage with the text, recognize organizational patterns, and improve comprehension. Narrative texts follow a story sequence, which can be visualized using a plot diagram that includes exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. Signal words such as then, suddenly, after, and meanwhile often indicate the sequence of events. A practical classroom application is while reading The Great Gatsby, have students map out the cause and effect chain of Gatsby's choices and how those decisions build toward the climax. This approach helps students see how events are connected and deepens their understanding of narrative structure and character development. A third approach is helping students with reading comprehension is the use of questioning strategies that elicit verbal reasoning. Effective questioning helps students engage with text on multiple levels. Literal questions target surface understanding, such as what happened or who is the main character. Inferential questions push students to think between the lines, for example, why did the author include this detail? Or what can we infer about the character's motivation? Evaluative questions go beyond the text, encouraging students to form opinions and connect ideas to the real world, such as, do you agree with the author's argument? Or, how does this connect to today's world? Additionally, student-generated questions empower learners to write their own wonder questions before, during, and after reading, fostering curiosity and ownership over comprehension. After reading a passage from Mice and Men, we can guide students through different levels of comprehension questions. First, a literal question like, what does George tell the boss about why he and Lenny travel together? Helps students focus on understanding the facts in the text. Then, an inferential question such as, why does George lie about his relationship with Lenny when talking to the boss? Encourages students to read between the lines and think about characters' motives. Finally, an evaluative question like, do you think George is justified in protecting Lenny the way he does? Why or why not? Invites students to form opinions and engage critically with the text. To deepen engagement, we can also encourage student-generated questions by asking them to connect personally or think about authors' choices. For example, what does this situation remind me of in my own life or other stories? Why might Steinbeck have chosen to portray this character or moment in this way? This helps build ownership and deeper comprehension. Let's stop and reflect. Which of these practices, vocabulary, text structure, and questioning, do you already use consistently? Which one could you incorporate more intentionally in your classroom? Pause the video to jot down your thoughts. Now we're going to shift into what this actually looks like in instruction, specifically through modeling and scaffolding. Modeling makes our thinking visible by showing students how skilled readers approach and process a text. Scaffolding provides the structured support, like prompts, sentence stems, and guided practice, that helps students gradually take ownership of those strategies. Together, they bridge the gap between teacher-led instruction and independent, confident reading comprehension. This matters because students don't automatically know how to comprehend complex text. They need to see it in action and be supported as they learn to do it themselves. Without modeling and scaffolding, many students are left guessing at how to make meaning from what they read, which can widen achievement gaps. Here are 3 powerful ways instructors can model and scaffold comprehension in the classroom. First, through teacher modeling or think-alouds, we make our internal thinking visible, showing students how skilled readers approach a text by verbalizing strategies like predicting, questioning, and clarifying. Next, we use scaffolds for comprehension, such as graphic organizers, sentence frames, and guided questions, to provide structured support as students build their understanding. Finally, we focus on supporting diverse learners by differentiating our scaffolds to meet a range of needs, ensuring that every student, regardless of language background or learning profile, has access to and can engage meaningfully with the text. When we model comprehension strategies, it's important to verbalize our thinking so students can see how skilled readers approach a text. For drawing inferences, we might say something like, the author doesn't state the character's guilt outright, but I notice clues in the dialogue, words like hesitate and avoid eye contact that suggest how they feel. For monitoring comprehension, we show students how to recognize when something isn't clear. This sentence is confusing, so I'll reread it and look for context clues, such as nearby explanations or examples to help me understand. And then, when recognizing text structures, we highlight how the organization supports meaning. This paragraph compares 2 characters, and I can tell because the author uses words like however and similarly. Modeling these think-alouds make comprehension strategies visible and supports students in applying them independently. While reading To Kill a Mockingbird, you can pause to model your thinking with a think-aloud. For example, Atticus tells Scout to walk in someone else's shoes. That makes me infer the theme of empathy will be important. I'll track where this idea reappears. This demonstrates to students how to notice key details, make inferences, and connect ideas across the text. By modeling this active engagement, students learn to monitor their own comprehension and develop habits of thoughtful reading. Another strategy is scaffolding, which can be done using graphic organizers or sentence frames. Graphic organizers are powerful tools to help students organize and interact with text. Examples include story maps to track plot events, character trait webs to analyze personalities and motivations, and theme trackers to follow recurring ideas throughout a text. In addition, sentence frames and discussion starters support students in articulating their thinking. Phrases such as "the author suggests," "this reminds me of," and "a pattern I notice is" provide scaffolds for expressing inferences, making connections, and noticing patterns, helping students engage more deeply with the material. The gradual release model supports students in moving from guided practice to independent work. During the I do phase, the teacher models annotation of a complex passage, demonstrating how to identify key ideas or figurative language. In the we do phase, the class annotates together with teacher guidance, discussing patterns and making interpretations collaboratively. Finally, in the you do phase, students annotate independently and share their interpretations with peers. This gradual approach builds confidence, reinforces strategies, and promotes independent comprehension skills. When teaching the Scarlet Letter, a character map organizer can help students track how Hester's traits evolve over the course of the novel. Provide sentence starters to scaffold student thinking, such as, in Chapter 3, Hester shows resilience when, and this encourages students to cite textual evidence while analyzing character development. By combining the organizer with guided sentence frames, students can make meaningful connections, notice patterns in behavior, and articulate their interpretations clearly. A third strategy for modeling and scaffolding includes supporting diverse learners. When working with English learners, for example, it's important to pre-teach key vocabulary before reading. Highlight idioms and figurative language, such as heart of stone or green with envy, so students can grasp meaning and context. Another effective strategy is to chunk texts, breaking longer chapters or passages into smaller sections accompanied by guiding questions. This approach makes complex text more manageable, provides scaffolds for comprehension, and allows students to engage with the material in a structured, supportive way. Using multimodal supports helps students access and engage with complex text in multiple ways. Providing audio recordings of novels allows students to follow along and hear fluency and expression. Incorporating visuals or symbolic images, such as scales of justice when reading Of Mice and Men, helps students connect abstract ideas to concrete representations. Additionally, color-coded annotations can guide students in tracking themes, character traits, or literary devices, making patterns in the text more visible and strengthening overall comprehension. While reading Of Mice and Men, it's helpful to pre-teach key concepts, such as loneliness, companionship, and migrant workers, using images and short context sentences. This gives students concrete reference points for abstract ideas and supports comprehension. Additionally, providing an audio version alongside the print text allows struggling readers to follow along, hear fluent reading, and better assess the narrative. These strategies make the text more accessible and help all students engage meaningfully with the story. Let's reflect once more. How might you adapt scaffolds to meet the needs of different readers in your classroom? Which strategy, think alouds, organizers, sentence frames, or multimodal supports, will you implement next in your classroom? Stop the video to write down your reflections. For the final section of this module, we will look closely at application to the high school classroom. Let's revisit Scarborough's reading rope and how skilled reading develops. It shows that comprehension depends on the integration of two main strands, decoding and language comprehension. This module, with a focus on high school students, reflects ideas and strategies primarily included under the language comprehension strand, with the application of these practices becoming increasingly strategic. Let's learn additional strategies for embedding the components of language comprehension. When teaching literary texts, focus on helping students analyze verbal reasoning, such as theme development, character motivation, and figurative language. Encourage them to track cause and effect relationships between character actions and plot events, and to look for textual evidence to support their interpretations. For example, in Macbeth, students can examine how Macbeth's ambition drives his decisions and leads to specific consequences, which helps them understand character development, plot progression, and thematic elements. This approach promotes close reading and critical thinking skills essential for literary analysis. Teach students to annotate text by noting themes, motifs, and figurative language, such as metaphors, similes, and symbolism. Use graphic organizers, like a cause and effect chart, to trace how character decisions influence the plot. Encourage students to make predictions based on character motivations and revisit those predictions as the story unfolds, fostering active engagement and critical thinking. For example, you might ask students to identify Lady Macbeth's persuasive techniques and analyze how they shape Macbeth's actions, connecting textual evidence to character analysis and thematic understanding. When teaching informational texts, guide students through their literacy knowledge, such as identifying claims, supporting evidence, and reasoning to understand the author's argument. Encourage them to evaluate reliability, bias, and perspective of sources, which is especially important in historical or controversial texts. Additionally, teach students to summarize processes, procedures, or explanations to ensure that they grasp the sequence and purpose of information. For example, in history, students might analyze bias in primary sources from the American Revolution, while in science, they could summarize the steps and reasoning behind the lab procedure. These strategies help students think critically and engage deeply with content area texts. Teach students to annotate text by highlighting claims, underlining evidence, and noting reasoning in the margins. Model how to question the author with prompts, such as, what perspective is represented? What is missing? For procedural or technical texts, use sentence frames. For example, step, purpose, outcome, to help students organize information clearly. In the classroom, students might analyze two primary accounts of the Boston Tea Party, noting differences in tone, perspective, and reported facts. These strategies develop critical thinking and ensure students actively engage with content and sources. Comprehension strategies can and should be applied across all content areas. In social studies, students can use graphic organizers or timelines to compare and contrast revolutions, helping them see cause and effect relationships and key differences. In CTE, or technical classes, scaffolded supports for technical manuals or procedures allow students to follow complex instructions and understand processes step by step. In math and science, students can annotate problem-solving steps or experiment protocols, tracking reasoning and outcomes. Using these strategies across disciplines reinforces comprehension skills and promotes deeper engagement with subject-specific texts through vocabulary and language structures. To support comprehension across disciplines, use double-entry journals, where students record text evidence on the left and reflections or questions on the right. Teach students to highlight keywords, definitions, or steps in the technical text before attempting tasks. In social studies, scaffold comprehension by guiding students to identify causes, effects, and turning points in historical events. And CTE provides step-by-step checklists to help students decode instructions in technical manuals, schematics, or software tutorials. For example, Students reading a manual on 3D printing can annotate each step with its purpose, required tools, and potential errors. These strategies help students actively process information, connect ideas, and apply comprehension skills in multiple content areas. Let's take one final moment to reflect. Think about a lesson or unit coming up where you could immediately apply one of the comprehension strategies we've discussed. Consider what might you need: resources, planning time, colleague support to make that happen effectively. Pause the video to jot down your thoughts. Let's review the key takeaways from today's session. First, comprehension relies on a foundation of decoding, vocabulary, and background knowledge. Explicit instruction in both literary and informational texts is essential for student understanding. Modeling and scaffolding help students gradually take ownership of these strategies. These approaches aren't just for English language arts. They can be applied across all content areas. Finally, think about where you can embed these strategies in your own lessons and what next steps you'll take to implement them effectively. We hope you enjoyed this module on the science of reading in the high school classroom, Part 3, Focus on Reading Comprehension. Please complete the Check for Understanding in the Google Classroom. Thank you, and we look forward to providing continued support for your professional growth as university instructors.